But we kind of need Matt days because he's chapter summarying.
That would be Matt number 2.
Oh, really? Are you Matt number 1 then?
Of course. Was there any question?
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 83, count 'em, 83 of the great A Song of Ice and Fire linear reread. My name's Bina 007. I will be your host for today. I am somewhat recovering from an awesome family wedding, so I will not be at my usual level of vim and vigor today. But that is okay because we have awesome hosts who are going to make this podcast fun and insightful and all kinds of crazy. Starting off with self-appointed OG, Matt number 1.
Farley on the forums.
Also with Michael.
Hey, Kawadegi on the forums.
With the lovely Casey.
This is Blue-Eyed Queen on the forums.
And Mary.
Hi, very tired, and I'm Miria on the forums. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, Europe is not representing well today.
Nope.
And with Zack.
Hi, this is Alias on the forums.
And hopefully at some point imminently, apparently Matt number 2, according to Matt number 1, Blue Matt. So Blue Armor on the forums. Sorry, I always call him Blue Matt. So hopefully he'll be in time for his chapter. So what are we doing today? We are finally getting to May. We've been in April for a long while. In fact, I was going to actually look up how long we'd been podcasting by April 300, and I bet it's like 6 months or something in these rereads. Because it took 18 chapters for George R.R. Martin to get through the events of April 300. I mean, he's slowed to a super slow crawl. In the month of April, Arya met Sam. The Faith Militant were rearmed. #Quentin is alive left Astapor. We got POVs from Melisandre and Jon Con for the first time, which was very cool. And Astapor and Deepwood Motte were captured, so, a fuck ton happened. By contrast, a year ago, in April 299, we covered the month in just 3 chapters in A Clash of Kings, and Arya arrived at Harrenhal, the Ranging arrived at Whitetree, and Dany arrived at Vaes Toloro. So, yeah, I think that just shows how far George got super detailed as he went on, and that really slowed the pace of the books down, for better or worse. Thoughts on the events of April, guys? Any thoughts on pacing here?
When's coming out?
Yeah, that was not the actual question. That wasn't the question.
I will answer your question with a better question.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that the slowing of pace, 18 chapters to get through 1 month, speaks to why we haven't had wins? In other words, speaks to the sort of the level of bogged downness.
Yes, I think he is, really getting stuck with so many point of view characters. Not having, I know one of the things that motivated his 5-year gap was he was sick of having flashbacks. But I almost think that he could do with having a few more flashbacks for his point of view characters so that these chapters can be further apart.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think some of those compendium chapters, and we actually get one of those in this episode with the Arianne chapter, one of those chapters that just takes you over a bunch of time is not a bad thing to have every now and then.
Yeah, and I think when you look at last April compared to this April, it was still in the original trilogy, which was super tight books. Everything was flowing really nicely, and now it's just kind of meandering through all these new POVs, and just like Michael said, just gets bogged down.
Yeah. Anyway, before this turns into a T-Wow dirge, we started reading of the events of April 300. We published a podcast on this on October 13th, 2018. So it's taken us 6 months to get through April. Hilarious.
We're on a very George-like pace.
We are. We're taking it easy. That's how we do. Okay. So we ended episode 82. If any of you haven't listened to it, you should, because it's a really great discussion. With Victarion plotting revenge on Euron in the Reaver on April 30th. In this episode, we're going to cover Tyrion 7 from Dance, The Princess in the Tower / Arianne 2 from Feast, and Brienne 7 from Feast. And these events take place from May 1st to May 3rd, 300 AL. So to kick us off with Tyrion 7, and by the way, obviously these discussions could contain spoilers from anything in A Song of Ice and Fire, not from Game of Thrones or T-Wow unless explicitly flagged up. Opinions are our own, not those of Ock. And kicking us off with Tyrion 7, we have Carl Wadegi.
All right, let's get into this chapter. So, Tyrion arrives at Volantis as a prisoner of Jorah just as the sun is setting. We are introduced to Volantis through Tyrion's eyes. It was once the greatest and most populous of the free cities, but wars have left much of the city empty and in ruin. The city consists of the east side, where the old blood dwell behind the black walls, and the western side for slaves, freedmen, and foreigners, connected by a gargantuan bridge of Valyrian engineering across the River Roine. Additionally, all slaves in Volantis are marked with an appropriate tattoo on their face. Tyrion tries to talk to Jorah and win him to his side, but Jorah has nothing but contempt for him. They pass the Red Temple, which is being attended by a mass of slaves and freedmen, as Benero, the High Priest, gives his sermon. Daenerys stands in peril, and minions of the night are plotting her downfall as he points to the black walls behind him. They arrive at the colossal merchant's house to spend the night. Tyrion is hoping that he might still be rescued by Griff and his men, but is shocked to learn that the Golden Company is turning west, not east, and that Volantene captains are racing up the river to offer transport to Westeros. They are to meet with the Widow of the Waterfront, known as Vogaro's whore east of the Roine. She was once a bed slave to the Triarch Vogaro, who fell in love with her and had her freed and married. When Vogaro died, she was exiled from the Black Walls as a freed woman, but continued his business at the waterfront of Volantis. As they meet, Tyrion notices that he has been spotted by another dwarf. Jorah asks for passage to Meereen, and Tyrion realizes that the Queen Jorah means to take him to is Daenerys, not Cersei. The widow talks of the looming election in Volantis. Beyond a doubt, Volantis will elect a Tiger Majority Council for the first time in 300 years, and that will mean war, though perhaps not the war that the Old Blood wishes. The Triarchs fear the Temple of R'hllor and their slave followers, so much so that they tried to hire the Golden Company to have Benero killed and the Red Temple scoured. The widow asks Jorah why he would wish to travel to Meereen, but Jorah refuses to answer. This angers the widow, who summons her bodyguards, the widow's sons, and asks once more why Jorah wishes to see the Dragon Queen. Jorah replies he wishes to serve her, defend her, and die for her if need be, which amuses the widow but still does not convince her of his intent. She refuses to help him, but before a fight can break out, the dwarf attacks Tyrion. Apprehended, the dwarf is revealed to be Penny, the jouster at Joffrey's wedding, whose dwarf brother Oppo was killed for the bounty on Tyrion's head. Tyrion apologizes for her brother's death, but Penny blames Tyrion and implores someone to kill him for her. The widow intervenes and instructs for Penny to be taken care of, and decides to help Jorah and Tyrion after all. To reach Meereen, they must board the Selasori Koran, bound for Karth. Benero has seen in the flames that it will never reach its true destination. When they see the Dragon Queen, the widow tells her to give a message from the slaves of Volantis. Tell her we are waiting, tell her to come soon. And that's the chapter.
Excellent summary.
Everyone's the
Controversy
worst.
was already kicking off on the Skype thread as to who's the worst, Penny or Tyrion. Michael, this
so
was your
sorry for
chapter.
Penny.
What
Or
are your
Jorah.
feelings on this?
Like when Penny gets caught and Jorah lifts him up and like her tunic rips and she starts crying. She's like, someone please kill him for me. And she's just so pathetic. Like, yeah, I felt really bad for Penny in the situation she's in.
I don't understand why they take her with them.
I was also surprised by that. There's not even a line that says, oh, they decided to invite Penny along with them or whatever. She's just there in the next chapter.
The worst. That's what Tyrion needs right now, is this distraction. Anyway, Casey, why is Jorah the worst?
He's so mopey. He's so just like, I need to win Dany back and you're my ticket. And that's all he's thinking about. And it's just so sad and I don't know, just depressing.
He's very humorless in this chapter. Like, Tyrion's trying to make jokes and he's just like, "Meh, stop being funny."
But he's
Meh.
always humorless, isn't he? I mean, Jorah is just
Okay,
sort
yeah,
of
he is.
dour, sort of self-important, I mean, there's very little to recommend him. I've decided I'm in love with you, therefore you have to keep me around even though I've been shitty, and I'm going to prove myself to you. It's just, nothing about that's attractive.
And Zack, why is Tyrion the worst?
Why is Tyrion the worst? All right. Well, this is obviously Tyrion at his emotional nadir that we see at this point in A Dance with Dragons. He is thinking all the time of how he can next get drunk or how he can end his life. It's obviously not a nice thing. But in particular, I had forgotten, especially in this chapter, how obsessed Tyrion is with Cersei in much the same way that we see in her chapters. She is obsessed with him. I do like the Jaime as Valonqar thing, but I almost feel like there needs to be a moment at some point where we get some resolution to this because their characters are so tied together in these two books, these two last books we have. Either just some kind of direct confrontation, or I would be happy with any kind of realization by both characters that they don't need the other because of some kind of dramatic character shift they experience, which I don't think we've seen yet. But something just to happen to resolve that, I really hope we do get to see, because it's I forgot how much that dominates both of their thought processes.
Totally. It's really weird. Like, I was reading this, and I haven't read these chapters, I think, kind of since the Feast Dance character reads we did, like, years ago. And I was like, Tyrion is at peak nihilism here. And then I was like, but, you know, he still cares about Griff losing to Dany, so he's still got a little bit of humanity. And then you get to the end of the chapter, and he's like, I want to rape and kill Cersei. Like, not even I want to kill Cersei, which is potentially understandable, but I want to, like, violate her in the most painful, powerful, horrible way. And it's just... oh, it's so bleak.
Yeah, I don't think there's any kind of other case that has this level of animosity between two characters. I think this is the strongest hatred I've felt between two of our main POVs at the very least.
Yeah, and it says something to me that I don't know, that it's still shocking to me. Like, I've read these books for a long time now, and I know that Tyrion gets dark, but just the level of malevolence really was good writing, because it really shocked me. And maybe in the after show, at the very end, for those who watch the show, we can discuss what they did to the character at this point. But yeah, and kudos to George, I guess. We always think of him as subversive, and it's perhaps easy to forget now just how subversive this is, to take one of the most popular characters and make him quite this grim, and how shocking it was at the time.
I would say his animosity to Cersei is what motivates him to give that false advice to Aegon, like just to make Cersei suffer when he says, go west, not east. It's totally a good idea. It's not, rational or anything, but it's, he wants to see the world burn.
Gosh. Yeah, just very manipulative.
I thought it was very interesting that when he's giving that advice, he's making these really convincing points. But now that we're back in his head, he's like, oh my God, they took the bait. What a bunch of idiots. And we'll see as the Golden Company and Griff land, they get really lucky. And I think they're going to continue to have really good fortune. But clearly Tyrion was always thinking of this as a trap.
It's a trap.
I mean, did they have any really good options, though? That's kind of my thinking on it.
Hey, Matt.
It's just that. Oh, hey.
Two Matts at
I
once.
finally arrived. I finally got out of bed here. Jesus.
If it's any comfort to you, I'm still in my PJs, and I have a 5-hour time difference on you. So.
Well, that's what happens when you're up till 3 a.m. the night before.
Anyway, please continue.
Yeah, I don't know, because I actually, overall, I think it was a good move for Griff to head to Westeros to at least gain some sort of, political leverage over Dany, because Tyrion was right when he was making the points to him, where if he just went to Dany now, it would be very similar to Quentin. I mean, yeah, you would have some help from the Golden Company, at least with some troops, but she has a decent amount of forces at this point. And she'll have fleets from the Ironborn, so it's not like the help from the Volantene fleets that the Golden Company gets would provide much for her. So I feel like the result might be the same, where, I feel like he's screwed either way, but I don't know, at least he has something to offer her by helping to rally some of the lords of Westeros before she makes it there.
My feeling at this point is the only person who can stop Aegon is Dany, the only person who can unseat him from a position of power. There's no one else that is equipped at this point in the narrative to do that, and I think that is the likely outcome, just because of Dany's perspective, and I think an ultimate revelation that Aegon is the mummer's dragon that we see in the in the tower. So I think that makes sense. I think that's the likely outcome there.
I mean, you don't think the hype sorry.
No, my only comment was going to be that it feels to me like Dany versus Fagon has to happen just from a sort of to make narrative elegance. That's how George works. And it feels like it's going to unravel in some kind of he tries to do something with a dragon, and because only Targs can ride dragons, it ends badly for him.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry,
I don't-
OG Matt.
No, I was gonna say that it was interesting that Zack, you don't think that Aegon's gonna meet with much resistance, because isn't Highgarden on its way to face them now?
That's true. I think, if I remember correctly, there is a mention by John Connington in one of those chapters that they have some kind of friend in the Reach. So my feeling on that was that there is someone who's going to ultimately usurp the Tyrells and take control of that force in favor of Aegon. That's the feeling I got from that. I think it's Randall Tarley. That's the person I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't that the
support.
Tarly conspiracy or something like that?
Yeah.
Like,
So that's what I think might counterbalance that. Plus,
I
the
also-
company
Be the
itself is
most
obviously
likely.
is an intimidating force in its own right. Could potentially overcome a Tyrell or
Yeah.
a host of the Reach.
them elephants.
Yeah, definitely those elephants are something that Westerosi armies are not used to. So that's good. They've got a great potential as shock troopers. That's how they used to be used. And also, I just think the Tyrell power base is rapidly sort of collapsing in King's Landing and also around. You've got the Ironborn Raiders now terrorizing the Reach. So its capacity to muster a full army is very limited.
Really, I think I would think that they would be gaining in power. Like now, he's assumed the handship and like put key members of the Reach into the small council. Like if anything, it's waxed while the Lannisters have kind of lost power.
I think Cersei, this is just speculation, she and her good friend Sir Robert Strong are going to find ways to really fuck that up in the Winds of Winter. This is just my
Cersei
hunch.
fucked something up. Come on, man.
I know it's
Don't
crazy.
do that.
I know it's really hard to believe, but
I almost wonder sometimes, like, if I know that we're diverging a bit and I'm talking about Aegon here, or Vagon, but I almost wonder if, like, you know, we're basically all at this point screaming for Dany to just, like, move on from Meereen and go to Westeros. I almost wonder sometimes if the whole Vagon story is just, like, a reason to tell us why to be patient, because something bad's probably going to happen to that whole plot at some point.
Yeah.
Well, I think a huge hint that we get in this chapter in particular that may end up benefiting Dany's patient position, or at the very least, if she does make the choice eventually to go to Volantis, is that as we hear from the what's her name?
Nero.
Right, we hear from Bonero and we hear from the whore of Vigaro that the slaves are waiting for her to come, and there is even a religious aspect to that where these slave priests of the Red God support Dany and they don't support the Triarchs, and that could be a huge swelling of her numbers, or at the very least.
What do you guys think would have happened if the Red Temple was scourged and like Bonero was murdered by the Golden Company? Do you think like all the wizards would have unleashed fire magic and burnt them or something? I think it would have been cool. Something cool would have happened.
Right. Yeah, it depends on how many. It depends on how many people they can muster. It's like they seem to have their own faith militant, but all they mention is kind of the equivalent of the warrior's sons with the fiery hand, which they say is only 1,000 people, but I'm sure they would have other fighters on top of that as well. The Golden Company couldn't. I guess they would need permission from the Triarchs to scourge them. But in doing so, you would essentially cause revolt amongst your own people because you're bringing in outsiders to destroy your own people. So it would have been a huge mess should they have tried to do that.
It is notable that by taking the Golden Company out of the game here, Aegon and John Connington may unwittingly put Dany in a position to overcome the threats that she has in the East, because if with the slaves of Volantis supporting her, she may be able to tip the scales of power in her favor.
I don't think she needs it, man. That upcoming battle with those fuckers on stilts and all chained together, it's just, she's going to crush them. Barristan's going to run them over.
Easily. Dothraki too, I'm sure.
Right. I mean, she'll have the Dothraki by the time she sails west anyway.
I definitely
Another
think
thing.
one of the purpose of this chapter is to set up Volantis, because it's going to be the next point of conquest for Dany. Well, I do think
don't
this.
say that.
No, don't. I wouldn't be worried about another Marine. It's going to be
It's gonna be quick.
Yeah,
Conquest 2.0, when
Yeah,
Dany
it's gonna
touches
be
the hands of it.
Genghis Khan
Yeah.
style, conquer, move forward.
Yeah, but if it was that, it wouldn't have taken 8 years to write it. So no, she just went from Marine to Volantis to pull another Marine, and we'll get a Valentine knot this time.
No,
Let us hope not.
she'll have no desire to rule there when she's so close. Plus, I'm sure Ilaria will have some sort of idea of, if he's not involved in rigging the elections now, he'll certainly be involved in setting up a government should she ever roll through them.
I think the Triarchs are history. Both those parties. I actually think the Widow of the Waterfront, who's my favorite character, maybe of all of A Dance with Dragons, is poised to take over in some way. It's just a hunch I get.
Yeah, she does seem to have that position. I do connected to all this. I love the idea of the high priests of the Red God also being slaves. It's just such a neat confusion of the traditional power dynamic where priests wield enormous power over the populace, but they are also slaves, so they are subjects of the people in that way. And this, this obviously will lead to the idea of how essential slaves will be in helping Dany to wrest control here. Where that decision back in Slaver's Bay may not have been as bad as it seemed. It seems like it's actually having a positive impact in other areas.
Don't say that.
It set off this chain reaction where all the other slaves are starting to revolt or want to.
Right, and that's not going to be a clean, neat thing as it wasn't in Marine, I'm sure. But at the very least, there's positive and negative aspects of that choice that she made.
So is this bridge supposed to be like the one in Florence? That's what I picture in my head.
Yeah,
Even longer.
I think it's a combination of Florence, but also in Venice. Like they have markets, long bridges and stuff. Feels to me, but like epic version.
Right, like times 10.
But it feels Volantis to me feels very Venetian. I'm reading Jan Morris's famous travelogue on Venice at the moment, and a lot of it feels very similar to that. So I'm wondering if that's what inspired George.
Like
It reminds me of
they have doges instead of triarchs.
Yeah, and just the different markets and the mercantile nature of the city and the fact that it's a melting pot and a crossover from different cultures and yeah, lots of that. And in the architecture, simply.
Was Volantis one of the sister cities of Valyria, or was that a separate one like Bravos?
It was the first free city that was founded, and the Valentine consider themselves like the head bitch of the 9 free cities.
And they have the closest connection to Valyria. I think Bravos actually is very much opposed to everything Valyria because it was founded by former slaves of Valyria, right? Yeah.
That's the outlier.
Yeah, Volantis is a cool setting to me, but it really is pretty much the same as other cities like Karth and Marine, at least as far as being this richly decadent place that's been overcome by corruption and squalor. These supposed jewels of old empires that have fallen into decay and ruin. That's the basic idea, I think, that is being explored with all these different places.
Yeah, and that's why Venice resonates for me because, it had its peak years in the 1500s and
right.
has since just fallen
peak
into
of
sort of
trading.
Yeah, now it's just sinking into the sea, literally.
Yeah.
Now it's a tourist trap, the horror.
Yeah, I remember when I went to Venice, they actually said that it's basically 100% tourists living there at this point. Or that's the 100% of what they do.
Yeah. Well, see it while you can.
Anything else on this chapter?
There was just one line that the widow has when she sees Tyrion. Oh, Volantis is overrun with dwarfs of late. Now, obviously, one of the other ones is Penny, who's in the merchant house. But I just wonder if there's been this great dwarf exodus from like Westeros and the free cities. Like they're all fleeing the bounty that's been set up, and so like Volantis is this transition point. I just thought that's an interesting geographic effect of what Cersei has done.
Never thought of it.
Yeah, it could be. It could just be she saw 2 dwarfs in one day.
Yeah. I like her as a person in her frank speech with Jorah and Tyrion. Like, she's like, no, I'm not a lady. I'm just Vagaro's whore. Like, I don't know. She seems cool. Very grounded.
She kind of reminds me of this Chinese emperor called Empress Wu Zetian, who she was in, I think, the 600s. And she started off as a concubine of an emperor, then became the wife. And when the emperor died, eventually she did a coup and became empress regnant in her own right, and ruled for like 50 years. And I wonder if George is basing her off this empress. Very
Jesus
interesting.
Christ,
lady.
Cal. Dropping knowledge. I was going to say like B. Arthur from the Golden Girls.
Or B. Arthur. Maybe that.
It's the same thing, basically.
Brilliant. Right. Anything else on Tyrion 7?
No, I'm excited for the conflict in Volantis, although I think over time in this wait for the next book, I've just become less and less interested in Tyrion's storyline moving forward when compared to other POVs.
Yeah, I buy into that. Right, so after Tyrion's 7 in Dance, we jump to The Princess in the Tower, Arianne 2 in Feast. This takes place on May 3rd, and I believe it is Blue Armor. Matt with the summary.
Part 1. Lion takes dragon. 20 years ago, the dragon prince hesitated, and he chose the wrong girl, and he paid for it with a hammer to the heart. The mad dragon was stabbed in the back by the golden lion, and the sun set, her blood splattered against the red walls. Peace. The stag and the lion reigned for a while, unhappily but peacefully, creeping inexorably towards moral and literal bankruptcy. Enter chaos. The falcon swallows the poisoned fish, boar takes stag, mockingbird takes gold, lion takes wolf, and the rest of the pack is ambushed at the bridge and flayed. An attacking gambit. The viper enters the lion's den, seeking only vengeance, only to be crushed by the mountain, and the desert rose up in new anger. Hot iron. The warrior's soul either rages with the fire of life or is cold with death. Cold iron defeats hot iron 4 out of every 5 times. It is held before you hard and sharp, inviting, and so you reach and are stuck fast. And Dorne is hot as the sun's fires, as the desert's heat. And so the Sun Princess reached. A gentle prison. Fire dies without oxygen, and dragons will eventually die from being locked in a pit for too long. Time can break any man, no matter how gentle the prison, and thus it was an angry girl who was eventually brought before the Prince of the Sun. A father's responsibility. Arianne is still a girl, and frankly, it's Doran's fault. He kept everyone in the dark about the marriage pact, and he hasn't properly prepared Arianne to rule after him. She has been able to study the game and learn from her mistakes. She's a woman who has not learned the strategies of Savas, who does not understand the importance of dry histories, who does not know patience. Patience means restraining yourself. There are 7 emotions: joy, anger, anxiety, adoration, grief, fear, and hate. If a woman does not give way to these, she's patient. She may not be the strongest, but she can be patient. Fire and blood. Dorne is the least populous of all the 7 kingdoms, no matter what the young dragon said. It cannot win a fair fight against the Iron Throne without help. Dorne has waited almost 20 years for his chance, and now it might be too late and too early at the same time. Remember rule number 1. It is a mistake to bring your dragon out too soon, and the Mummer's dragon is only bringing elephants. And that's my recap of the chapter.
That was like a fracking haiku for those of us who are not like mentally fully aware today. Oh man, that was beautiful.
How evocative.
Indeed.
Loved it.
Yeah, it was awesome. This whole situation's a little bit Edmure, isn't it? I kind of feel like when you get these people like Edmure, yeah, when you get these like people who are making dumb decisions, and then like the person in charge is like, "You dumbass, you didn't realize there was this big convoluted plot happening, and now you're messing it up." And they're like, "Yeah, but you know, tell me, clue me in. That might be helpful." So I really sympathize with Arianne insofar as I have very little time for Doran, and when she says he thinks he's being subtle when he's only being feeble, I'm like, yeah, I get that, because I get playing the long game, but you might want to bring some people into your circle of trust. Yeah. Any defenders of Doran and his Dornish plotting on this cast?
I will say, if you split Doran's ruling policy into how it affects Dorne as a kingdom and Dorne as his family, you can see some of his strengths. Just by keeping the kingdom out of the War of the Five Kings, he's sort of not jumped on like any easy bandwagons like the Tyrells did, and then they had to double down and marry into the Lannisters, and now it's causing them all sorts of problems. So he's kept Dorne out of this costly war, and I think this will be reflected in the endgame by Dorne being not as despoiled. So that's my one defense of Doran. But when you get to his decisions and how they affect his family, that's where he really fucks up.
Yeah, but Dorne is like seething, right? It's ready to go to war. Like it's kind of like the Vale in that sense, where everyone's like eager to make the name for themselves and want to see war, but they've been kept out of it. So, especially after the Viper goes down, I think his domestic policy may have saved Dorne overall, but it's very perilous right now.
Yeah, so right, I defend him in the fact that like he's correct. They don't have the troops to win a non-guerrilla war essentially without allies, and so he kind of has to wait and to pick his side. But for sure, it's a mistake to leave kind of
his advisors and family out of it. It quickly turns around, where by the next chapter everyone's involved who needs to be. And yeah, that's a tough call where he brings up that it's hard for him to kind of tell Arianne everything, as she would gossip and share it with all of her adoptive sisters and whatnot. So I can understand the dilemma of choosing exactly when to bring everyone in, but for sure it was too late.
I think we tend to have a pretty polarized view of Doran, and this chapter is often a tipping point between the two, just by virtue of the fact that we see so little of him that we want to have this kind of broad impression about what kind of character he is. So prior to the end of this chapter, we do kind of think of him as impotent. He's just not active. He doesn't seem to have any kind of stake in the game. He's not making any kind of movements. And after this chapter and this sort of rousing fire and blood speech we get at the end, it makes us think he is this kind of mastermind who has been plotting the whole time. And the truth is, he's not really either of those things. He makes some good decisions like any other leader, and he makes some bad ones that I think are questionable. And I think my feeling is things are not going to work out well for Dorne in the grand scheme of things. But I think that he is equal parts capable, and he's made plenty of good choices over the years. And there are things that I question, like the decision not to inform Arianne and to keep people out of his plots.
I think I kind of very much judge parents in Game of Thrones by how they've raised their children or what lessons they have attempted to pass on to their children. So, for instance, I don't really rate Ned much, but he did genuinely try to raise his kids to be good, benevolent, but strong rulers. And I give him some credit for that. And I feel with Doran, when you're putting so much you're rolling the dice with Quentyn, it's not clear to me that Quentyn has in any way benefited from any specific teaching or preparation for that role. And again, with Arianne, if she's going to rule, it just seems to me incredibly poor not to try and teach her and bring her into the circle of trust. So I have some sympathy, because he does come from, as he says, the least populous country. He's physically in huge pain, probably chronically. But it's just, he's a fail for me. He really is.
I actually love it, though, as an example of a failed father-daughter relationship that we see really strongly in this chapter. Just the line that Arianne gives when they're in dialogue, where she says, "You've been disappointing me for years, father." It's just like, that's such a strong encapsulation of the relationship, and it's true, right? It's true. And there's aspects of her that probably aren't right to be so disappointed in him. She might be overly judgmental of him in some ways, but she really has, I think, the right in saying that he has failed her as a daughter, and he has failed in a lot of different ways. And as much as he's trying to make things right, I think that's just a fact that's not going to go away.
But even not seeing her for so long, what purpose does that serve? Is he trying to soften her up or break her in some manner? I don't really understand it.
I do think it does have a positive impact on her character, this whole experience. Obviously, it's debatable if it's the right approach to take, but I do think this is the moment, and I like this as character development for Arianne, even though it's not the ideal way that it was precipitated. I like that Arianne has this moment where she loses this feeling of invincibility and total control. I think that's very much how I see her character prior to this, prior to being stuck in the tower, is she feels like she can do anything, that she's capable of anything, and she has to slowly realize that she does not always hold all the cards, and sometimes you have to be more patient, and sometimes you have to realize that you are not always in a perfect position.
I don't know. I think probably the whole situation with Masala and Aris dying and the whole thing falling apart did that, actually.
Yeah, that's more significant, but it's just that she has so much time, I guess, to ruminate on those things.
Yeah, but it's just it's terrible. Like by the end of it, she's not eating, she's not.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and it's not like a ploy to be like, well, okay, if you're not gonna see me, I'm just gonna stop eating and we'll see. It's just she's really depressed, and that I don't feel right about that. Even
to be clear, I'm not condoning.
Yeah, no, I know, but I think it wasn't even necessary for her to go through this, to have this new understanding that she cannot do everything.
I mean, she did need like one more piece of kind of mental maturity here, where at the start of the chapter she is trying to figure out who the betrayer was in order to blame someone else for all the terrible events that just happened. Whereas by the end she's realized that it's her fault and she needs to do something different with how she's treating the world these days. And that's why I think I like this chapter, because I think it's kind of the shifting point where mentally this is where kind of she really grows up and goes from girl to woman, in terms of what she needs to do as a future ruler of a kingdom.
Yeah, I think in that way, what you just said, it's interesting that I don't think we've gotten that realization. Like, I think she shares the fact that she thinks she's so smart and that she can rule, and it's very similar to the way that Cersei thinks she's just like the smartest person in the room the entire time, like through her POV. And I don't think we've seen a POV of her after the walk, and it'd be interesting to see if she comes to this realization, like, oh yeah, no, she did fuck up, like, and it was on her and not placing the blame on someone else like she usually does.
Another issue I wanted to talk about, because this is obviously we only get 2 Arianne chapters in Feast, and we're coming very near the end of that book, even though we're doing the linear combo reread. We're very fast approaching the end of Feast. I'm not sure if you guys can think back that far, but sort of how did you feel about getting these 2 chapters from her in Feast? Were you excited about this new POV? She only gets the 2 chapters, and it reminded me a lot of Dany in Game of Thrones, where you had this one woman who was sort of meant to be a little bit sort of exoticized and set apart from the main plot. And I kind of struggled with Dany early on, and I think I kind of struggle with Arianne a little bit, that she seems to be this sort of like peripheral, a very exoticized sort of character that's problematic in some ways and not frequently enough seen to become someone I deeply engage with. Any thoughts on Arianne from you guys?
I feel like if George had more time to review A Feast for Crows, he would have changed that heiress chapter to be from Arianne's point of view. I've always thought that it's a bit weird for this to be given to heiress and then just he gets killed. I feel like this might have been served better if we were seeing it from Arianne's point of view, because that's obviously how she's introduced in person, naked with only a snake bracelet around her and all that stuff. And
I
understand.
It wouldn't have made that scene better.
Yeah.
But it couldn't have made it worse.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
I think it would have been better from her perspective, and I think it would have done a better job of completing this kind of arc of her character that we see in these chapters. And I do think there is an arc, and I do actually like her a lot as a character, especially in this chapter. I find her very relatable for the reasons that we've talked about, this idea of having to confront this feeling of invincibility and challenge that and overcome that and become this more mature person. I really enjoy that as a storyline. I do enjoy the father-daughter relationship and the ways that that's confronted in this chapter, but most of it comes in this chapter where it gets really interesting, and you want to see where that goes from here, for sure, to see what she ultimately does and who she ultimately becomes.
Yeah, I think I like her character, and I like that point of view that we're seeing from, we're getting a Dornish view from, a Dornish person. I think it just falls to the fact that her entire arc could be that of Quentin, where we met him, we're like, who's this kid? And then he's dead by the end. And I think with the pacing of George's books, it's just like, if these minor character POV things is what's holding him up, like, what the fuck?
For one thing, I am biased towards Arianne. This personally, the reason I took this chapter to recap is it's one of my favorites of the entire series. It's the chapter I consider to be the climax of Feast for Crows. And it made me, I don't know, at least the first time I read through it, which it was admittedly a long time ago, when perhaps I was not as smart a reader as I am today, where in the slog that was Feast, this was a real bright point for me, and I was excited about reading the Dornish plot going in, and it kind of delivered for me what I was hoping for. I think Arianne is meant to be kind of the main POV in Dorne, and kind of using the other temporary POVs was just to serve as to help with an introduction, and I think it would have
would have worked if we got more of them in sequence rather than having to wait between 3 different books to get more Arianne chapters. But I think it's just the time away and how little we've seen of her so far. It's hard to judge it properly.
Yeah, I guess like the Fire and Blood mic drop at the end of this is very similar to the North Remembers in the Davos chapter in Dance with Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly other moments in this book that are also fairly big moments. This was just one of the ones that stood out to me, and I really enjoyed the reveal at the end when I first read it.
Super. Yeah, it was a really great twist when I first read it, for sure. Okay, any other thoughts on this chapter?
I would say this chapter represents my thoughts on sort of all of A Feast for Crows, in that we have this really brilliant exchange between Doran and Arianne, which is, great dialogue, great characters. But the first half, we have this very long passage of time, which I understand is meant to feel debilitating, but I feel it goes on maybe a little longer than it should have. So yeah, there's a bit of stuff that could maybe be contracted a bit, slimmed down, but there's also great character stuff that shows that George still has the magic touch.
I mean, that was the point I was making, where the first half of this chapter is just him cramming all the introductory information about Arianne and her personality into one section, rather than having three different chapters of kind of build up to show who she really is as a character.
Yeah, I agree with that. Casey, Mary, any other thoughts on Arianne before we move forward?
I mean, I kind of felt similarly like Matt did when I was first reading this. I actually thought that this was pretty, if there was a climax in Feast, this was it, to me. And it was a great reveal, but the only thing I worry about it going forward is, trust in Durand. Do we think that everybody's going to be all for his plan going forward, or because he kept so many people in the dark beforehand, do they really trust his plan? That would be my only concern going forward with them.
Well, I think we know it. Unfortunately, his plan, at the very least, with Quentin will fail. It seems
right.
So.
I'm pretty sure
that aspect of it will not work out. But maybe perhaps Arianne will have a better outcome with whatever he plots with her.
That's interesting. Go ahead, Matt.
They are going to war now, which is kind of what everyone in Dorne wants. So they'll at least agree with that point.
Yeah, it's interesting what Casey brought up, whether or not people would trust Doran's plan. And because it does seem like he could have just kind of made a decision finally and never really had a plan, just kind of stalled, and then finally had to pull the trigger on something.
Yeah, he's certainly being forced to pull the trigger now. Now that a claimant Targaryen has landed, he's pretty much forced to pick a side now. And that might, backfire on him in the long run when Dany burns Fagon alive. Will Dorne get caught up in that? It's going to be a perilous.
I just don't have a good feeling about it. I just don't. No, it doesn't feel like it's going to end well. It feels to me that this plan was doomed to fail from the start. When he talks about how they were plotting originally to marry Arianne to Viserys, it just feels like either through patience or just the fact that a true window is never going to present itself, that there's just not a happy ending that they're going to experience here.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, so I felt for Arianne a lot in this chapter, but I also wondered, what do you think George thinks of Doran? Does he think that he is writing a very intelligent character who is just smart and plots and hides everything very well from everyone? Or does he think, like us, that he's kind of a moron to just keep everyone in the dark for so long and that it's not going to work out well?
I think it's a bit of both. And when we jump to the next chapter with Doran, his final line is, aside from Oberyn, no Dornishman has died in this war so far. Is that my grief or my glory? And, there is no answer to this.
Yeah, and I think there's a line in my chapter that we'll cover, but it is that what you just said, Cal, that George writes him as what would be a competent ruler and thinking about the safety of his people first rather than any personal vendetta. but I don't think that works out in this world that he's created. Like in any other situation, like that's how you want to rule, but in our world here, it's not going to cut it.
Okay.
I'll just add that I think that Doran reads very much as a deeply flawed character, as with many others, and I think that's intentional on George's part.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the themes he's trying to kind of eke out with Doran's character is the failure of revenge and how it will lead you to ruin.
Go read Stefan Sarsay's essay, Savoring the Taste, in A Flight of Sorrows. It's all about revenge and where revenge gets you in A Song of Ice and Fire. Very, very relevant.
Yeah, or just, watch, like, Chan-wook Park's films. the Revenge trilogy, like Old Boy.
No. Okay, after Arianne 2, we jump back to Brienne 7, which takes place on the same day. This is 2 chapters and 80 pages back in the book. And we have Vali Mo Vali with the chapter summary.
Okay, so this chapter has Brienne. It's a Brienne POV there with Heil Hunt, Pod, and Septon Maribald and Dog. Still in the Riverlands, going to the Inn at the Crossroads where we get a history lesson about them, but the way is just littered with corpses hanging from trees, which sets the tone for this chapter, which is kind of like a horror sandwich, because as I reach the inn, they finally talk. It's run by children now for some reason. Gendry's there, but they have this really nice moment where they're making porridge together, and like there's a naked kid on the table trying to get to it, and it seems kind of like a nice like little respite from the outside world. And then Brienne decides to go bring some food to Gendry, and that's when the rest of the what were they called? The
Bloody Mummers.
Bloody Mummers show up. Yeah, so we get Rorge and Biter. Rorge is wearing Sandor Clegane's helm. He attacks Brienne after threatening sexual violence to the 10-year-old girl, which is classic Rorge. So Brienne kills him and whispers sapphires to him as she pulls a sword out. But as she does that, Biter comes over and knocks her on the ground, beats her head against a rock, and then starts eating her. And then eventually gets stabbed through the head as she's losing consciousness. So the whole scene of this chapter is just... she describes these bodies hanging off in like various forms of decay, and they think that they're the work of Dondarrion, and these must be the guys that raided salt pans and raped and killed and basically burnt that town to the ground because they all salt stuck in their mouth. But the one line that I was talking about with the Doran, it's like it's Septon Maribald. He says, "It's being common-born that is dangerous when the great lords play their Game of Thrones. Isn't that so, Dog?" And Dog barked in agreement. And I feel like that one statement can basically sum up, like, shit. Can basically sum up like the kind of theme of the entire series so far.
I really liked Dog's contribution to that statement.
Dog's good.
Added a lot there.
Anyway, not much to really talk about, besides the fact that I guess Brienne's smarter than like everyone in King's Landing because she figures out Gendry is a bastard of Robert like immediately.
To be fair, she was crushing on Renly pretty hard, so
that's fair.
She's got the skills necessary.
Yeah, she's studied their body structure a lot.
Yeah. Anyone have anything?
Nope, we're done.
That's a tight hour. We did, Bina.
This feels like the climax of Brienne's story in the same way that Arianne's chapter was the climax. You have the lightning flashing, the sword fight between Rorge and Brienne. And because it's got, exciting shit happens, I actually like this Brienne chapter.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a great action sequence. The no chance, no choice line. And overall, it's a fairly, it's a quick moving chapter. You essentially, it's 2 parts. You get the introduction, meeting the end of the crossroads and getting that fun history, and then the rest of it, is just setting up this climactic battle here, as well as kind of the hints towards the Gendry's connection with the Brotherhood and the Lord of Light and all that.
This is another chapter to me that another Brienne chapter specifically that reads really well in isolation. It's not quite as engaging to me as some of the other ones, but the atmosphere is really good. I'm always for a battle in the rain. I always love that, and it's just nicely written. But I think going again to our feelings on Brienne's setting Brienne's storyline in the context of the whole book, it just is not as interesting. It loses power because it doesn't feel like it's as connected to the more significant plot lines. But just reading this chapter alone, like many of the other ones, I really love it. I really like pretty much everything that happens. Obviously, bad things happen, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, I will say this is kind of one of the parts where the POV style structure in the way that George writes has me wanting more. Where after she gets knocked out and cut away, like I would wish that it would be like other fantasy stories I've read, where it would cut to another POV and kind of describe the rest of what's going on in the battle conflict, no matter how short it might be. But the parts that we do get are very well written.
Yeah, like you kind of get from her POV that there is, like, I think at one point she says, like, oh, the Clash of Steel, it must be, Hyle Hunt has joined the fight or something like that. But you don't really know, like, who dispatched Biter. We assume it's Gendry, I think.
Yeah, probably, and then the rest of the Brotherhood takes care of the other people.
Yeah, Hyle Hunt fought all 5 of them by himself. That's what happened.
There's a really, Hyle Hunt keeps on making all these fucking comments where it's just like, shut up, dude. But there's like an almost genuinely sweet moment with Brienne where he's like, you know what, you could do worse than me. Like, all I want is your land, and all you want is little babies. Like, well, why don't we make this happen?
Yeah, I honestly kind of like Hyle Hunt. I feels like he's kind of Tyrion pre the end of Storm of Swords, where he's that right level of one-liner, comedic, self-deprecating, before it becomes like overly shitty. I actually kind of like him as a character, just as a personality.
Yeah, his word choice is just off at some points.
Oh yeah,
it's just like you could have presented that without being a douche.
Oh yeah, he makes plenty of shitty comments, no doubt about that.
That's the main thing. Yeah, no, with all the Song of Madness that's going on with the tournament or whatever, people were really shitting on Hyle Hunt. And I was like, he's not that bad relatively to a lot of other characters, but yeah,
he's no nimble dick, but he's
right. Yeah, there are definitely ways where he's just unnecessarily douchey.
Oh, for sure.
Go
ahead.
In terms of nice guy status, I rate Hyle Hunt as above Jorah, but below the guy that's trying to hit on Asher. What's his name?
Carl the Maid?
That guy.
No, the Stannis' dude that gets sent to Bravos.
Is it?
What's his
Massey? Justin Massey?
Yeah, Justin Massey.
Do you have a power rankings for these?
Justin
nice guy.
These are deep cut characters.
As the nicest nice guy, and then Hyle Hunt in the middle, Jorah at the bottom. But they're all nice guys at the end of the day.
Is the worst, at least in the books.
This whole Orphan Inn experience feels to me like a scene out of another story. It just doesn't feel like it quite fits, but I like it a lot. But the image in particular of Septon Maribald leading the grace while there's a naked child crawling across the table, it's so funny.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. Like the whole like context, like you're walking through this like hanging graveyard through the first half of the first third of the chapter. Then you get this nice like domestic like little scene, like where Hyle and Brienne are talking about maybe making a family of their own. Like there's children everywhere. Maribald's like, I'll bring you an orange next spring, little one. It was almost doomed. It was like, he's going to take the entire empire on himself or something. And none of them will actually live to see spring and get that orange. It's very sad.
Alas.
So the main girl here, something Heddle? Jane Heddle?
Jane Heddle.
Yeah.
Willow and Jane.
Willow and Jane. But the last name of Heddle, niece to Masha Heddle. The Heddles pop up in the Mystery Night with Dunk. It's the guy that Dunk kills. So they used to be lords or knights, but now they're basically commoners. I just thought that was interesting.
Well, they probably picked the wrong side of the uprising, right?
Yeah, on the Blackfire side.
That's what they say here, where that the dragon out front of the inn for a time was black, and so it got taken down.
I do like the amount of history this particular inn has. I like that we get a place that's not a castle but has a history and a story behind it. Obviously, much of that history is very bloody, but it's cool to have a location like that has so much backstory that we obviously explore here quite a bit.
Yeah,
and Brienne even mentions it's like Brienne even mentions that like it hasn't been burnt to the ground like every other thing that isn't a castle in the area.
Yeah, no, it's a nice setting that like a bunch of characters pass through over the course of the story. But that's always
we get a bunch of callbacks.
One might say this inn was the setting of one of the most significant events in the story, which is when Cat captures Tyrion, and that whole mess happens.
And then Masha hangs outside on the gibbet for like 3 books, and eventually, I guess, just blew away to dust.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's where Arya and Sandor fought too.
It's true. They mentioned the bloodstains on the floor.
Yeah.
I think there's also something to be said for having the Inn at the Crossroads as an important place, because if George's whole kind of, I guess, project is to show what war means for ordinary people and what misrule means for ordinary people, then he needs a location that isn't just a castle. So it's kind of pivotal, I think, in so many ways that he has this as this place where people come back and forth, and we see how it evolves from being like a well-ordered inn at the start to being this place that's something out of a horror film with feral kids running around. I really love it.
And you can clearly see the consequences of being in a centrally located place like the Riverlands. It doesn't end well for these characters.
Yeah. Anything else on this chapter?
As Brienne is passing out, the last thing she sees is Biter's tongue, which is really long and weird. It took many rereads to realize that he's in fact having a spear shoved through his head.
Yeah.
I missed that like 5 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, that description is very odd.
Okay. Well, anything else on anything else? Or should I wrap up?
Well, we were just talking about how it's pretty straightforward, the chapter. It's not much. One thing I wanted to maybe bring up is just that the state of the Brotherhood without banners right now, and how they still think it's being led by Dondarrion.
Yeah. How dumb are they?
Yeah. And, but they seem to be fairly effective with finding, all the guys that are tormenting the Riverlands. And I think in the next Brienne chapter, we get a fact that like this wasn't just an inn run by kids. It was watched by the Brotherhood, and what's his name, Lemon Cloak or whatever, fucked up and like went away tracking these bad guys for too long.
Okay. I mean, yeah,
can't wait for evil Lem.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's gonna be fun. They've been slowly, kind of taking over inns. Like that's kind of been many inns have been like their main base of operations over the course of the story since they were formed by Beric. So yeah, no, it makes sense. I also like. I mean, how would you know that if you're some lord in some castle? How would you know that Beric isn't still running the Brotherhood these days?
Yeah, it's obviously a piece of the theme of information dissemination being very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, there's been stories about him dying for like month and month and months. So obviously nobody believes them anymore. So yeah, how would they assume that it's not him anymore running the thing?
Okie dokie. So that is the end of this rather concise but beautifully formed podcast. For those following along at home, the next episode of the Reread is going to be hosted by QueenJames. It's going to cover Arya 3, Cat of the Canals, Sam 4, and Cersei 7 from Feast, which for any of you eagle-eyed listeners will know it's the death of Aemon chapter, which is going to be super moving. I know. And we're on episode 83. We finish Feast on episode 88, so we're getting to the end of another book again. So if you all have any good ideas of what to discuss, or whether you want to discuss Feast as a sort of standalone entity at the end of that, then let us know. Also to let you know that obviously Game of Thrones, the final season is starting mid-April, so we might try and sporadically put out an episode of the Reread, but we'll probably be at lower frequency just to allow all the various casts to go out and on. So with that, my name's been Bina 007. Does anyone else have any other podcasts they want to pimp out?
Last weekend we recorded the Deadwood Season 2 podcast,
wow.
and we're going to try to get Deadwood Season 3 going because the Deadwood movie's coming out in May. Yay!
Yeah, awesome. Anyone else?
We will be continuing the future longest running Harry Potter reread next weekend,
Oh, yay!
which will be the second part of Prisoner of Azkaban, which
Very
we have
cool.
gotten to after about 4 years.
Excellent.
Are we definitely doing that like video game music thing, Zach?
Yeah, we will. I'll get that rolling as well. So that'll be, if anyone's interested, just a fun discussion on some of our favorite pieces of music from video games.
Ooh, okay.
What about just sound
Probably not
effects like Silent Hill? That was creepy as shit.
Yeah.
Super creepy.
Probably not till after the con, though.
Oh, so
Most
who's
likely.
going to con on this call? Anyone?
Me.
Me.
Me too.
Oh boy, good reps.
Not to mention Valkyrist for all the
Yeah.
Okay, Vassals. You can follow us along at home on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, iTunes, Grindr, Tinder, whatever you want. Whatever tickles your fancy and floats your boat. We are an inclusive club here. Search for Vassals of Kingsgrave or VOK Podcast and you will probably find us. Or join the conversation on the forums of a podcast of ice and fire from whence we came. And, get involved. I have been Bina 007, not quite firing on all cylinders. Thank you also to Casey, Zack, to Matt, other Matt, and better Matt. I don't know what's going on. Goodbye, everybody.
Whoa.
Bye,
Whoa.
Michael. Thank you. Good night.
Bye, Bina.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Bina. Bye, guys.
Mary, also, I forgot. Okay. So anyone who doesn't want to talk Game of Thrones, Tyrion should probably dial off now.
I'm gonna leave.
Okay. It was great podcasting
Bye,
with you,
Marie.
though. Bye.
Au revoir,
Yeah,
Marie.
it was nice. It was nice lurking, guys. Have fun talking about the show.
Happy
Nice podcasting
recovery.
with you.
Bye, everyone, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.
Love
See
you.
you.
Cheers.
Hello, Governor.
Oh man, I'm so tired. I'm so broken. I'm a broken individual.
Yeah, same here. We went to a 2-year-old's birthday party yesterday, and then like every baby in the area showed up. And then we went to dinner with a couple friends, and we went to a buddy's party. And I don't think I ate real food at all yesterday. If it wasn't like covered in cheese or some fake processed food coloring, I didn't eat it. My tummy hurts.
Aww.
Children are very exhausting.
Welcome to your future life, Ali.
I know. Well, it was fairly amusing because the adults were all getting drunk, and one drunk drove a power wheel right into the corner of the yard.
It's a trap!
Do we want to talk about the New York meetup, or just tell Zach to go screw?
Yes.
I want the hot goss. What
Let's talk
happened?
about the New York meetup.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
Did anyone have sex?
Not that I know of. I certainly
Just
did.
asking.
Zach did
But
not have sex.
I will
We've
not speak
confirmed
for
that.
anyone else. I'll not speak for anyone else.
So who was at New York Moot?
So at New York Moot, we had myself and Duncan and Greg, and we also had Julia, and we had David, which was awesome. We went out and played some Game of Thrones trivia at a bar in New York. We only got third place, I
That
will
just
say.
is
Shocking
appalling.
lack of knowledge.
I know. We lost by 2 points out of 60. Well, the highest score was 62. There were 5 rounds of the trivia, and it was surprisingly difficult. In particular, we struggled with the third round, which was on Game of Thrones quotes, specific quotes, and attributing who said them, and it was tough. I personally haven't watched the show fully in a while. I've only watched most of the latter seasons one time, so I don't have a great memory for all of the quotes of all the characters, but I'd say we acquitted ourselves okay.
How good of a loser was Greg, or was he?
Oh, not at all. Not
I was about to say, it must have
Greg
upset
is
him
never a
deeply.
good loser at trivia, obviously. Everyone else was very conciliatory, though. Not Greg. Not Greg.
I loved Casey's comment on the Facebook photos where she's like, "Oh, look at Greg talking through every photo."
Every
Yeah.
single photo he takes, he's talking talking during it. I don't know why, but he does that.
It's brilliant.
It was great though. I had a great time.
Excellent. And then Valkyrist is now moving to the West Coast, so I think there's meetups in the work with Amberox, Dr.
Sarah.
Blood, Shadow Baby, potentially me if I'm out there at the same time, so that'll be good fun. Yeah, okay. Happy days.
Yeah.
So, boys and girls, I'm going to wrap this up while my brain is still functioning.
It's a trap!
Right, okay. So for those of you who are still listening, this is now going to be a bit where we talk about not just the books but also the shows. So if you don't watch Game of Thrones, this is your final warning. You may want to now leave the aeroplane of Vok. Okay, so how do you guys feel?
Stannis dies. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, because Tyrion 7 is so freaking dark. And I've been doing a speed rewatch of Game of Thrones in anticipation of the next season. And, you get to this point, which I'm currently watching, kind of after A Storm of Swords, where as a show watcher, you're expecting it to take this right turn into darkness, and it just snaps it back really super quickly.
Yeah.
How do you all feel about that?
Well, I mean, for what it was, it makes sense. But like you said, when you're expecting to see this like really dark Tyrion emerge, and all you get is like maybe vomiting on a rug and then witty banter with Varys, like it's obviously not the same. It's different.
Is this just show? Is this just TV? TV can't get that dark? Or is that bullshit? Because
Yes.
HBO frequently gets that dark. So it was just commercial that they didn't want to let their favorite character get that dark. Is it a money decision, not a
I think that's part of it for sure. I think that Tyrion is such a figurehead for the show in a lot of ways, and he is so defined for a lot of the fan base by just being this sharply witty, acerbic character, and for him to become someone totally unlikable, I think would have a negative impact on a lot of people would not appreciate that, and I think that's a disservice to his character. My overall feeling on Tyrion in the show is that he's not really even a character anymore. For the last several seasons, he's just a sideshow for Dany to give kind of hollow advice that mostly isn't that useful, and to give one-liners and to drink wine. And that's really all he does. Yeah.
So he's become almost like a caricature of the character that we fell in love with.
I think so. Yeah. I think end game is. I don't know what will happen with Tyrion.
To ride a dragon.
Yeah, I think Bina, you had mentioned like during your rewatches, like season 5, it really dropped off as like, yeah, you could see what happens when like the writers had no, reference material to go off of, and they're kind of on their own. Like everyone's just kind of looking at each other and doing witty one-liners instead of, actual, character developing dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, overall, like, character development is just stopped in its tracks, like, just in favor of getting through the plot elements that they need to finish the story. I mean, I feel like his character kind of stopped growing probably before most of the other ones did, but almost everyone's on the same boat now, whereas we just kind of have to ignore that aspect if we want to find enjoyment in the show. Making his character not be too dark was, I think literally just for popularity's sake. I think it's the same reason. Cersei should be dead by now. But because Lena Headey is such a popular actress and character, and to give her credit, is the best actress left on this show. I feel like no one else is really trying too hard, whereas she is always giving her full effort to her character. But yeah, the only reason she's still around is her popularity's sake.
Shots fired on Daenerys, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's nothing against Emilia Clarke or even Kit. I mean, most of the Jaime's the same way. They're not given a lot to work with these days.
I feel like it's like action or CGI, and then the reaction of either like Lena Headey like smirking in approval as she blows up people, or it's always, there's no real dialogue. It's all these reaction shots.
It's honestly like Tyrion to me now. Like I feel like if they made him dark I think people actually probably would have enjoyed the show maybe even a little bit better. Like, I feel like now they're just like, anybody's gonna like whatever we put out there. But Tyrion's just so boring throughout the last like 3 seasons pretty much.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, saying his things. It's like, okay, cool, what's gonna happen? And then, I mean, I do wonder where he's headed this season, because we do have at the end of this past season, season 7, he's like looking super upset and sad while Dany and Jon are, you know, so
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I
So
could not read
He's
that.
always the third wheel in any like incestuous relationship, isn't he? Can someone get a dwarf some action?
yeah. What you bring that up, and now I'm thinking about all the previews and all like the set pictures, and I don't remember seeing Tyrion in anything.
I mean, I'm sure he shows up for like, I'm sure they show a flash of him. But yeah, like he has nothing to do. There's no, you know, there are other people that are better at military tactics than he is.
Right.
And there's no dragon for him to ride. Like, so what the hell is he
Yes.
gonna do?
And also in
What do you
the
mean,
show,
yes?
there's no like, well, I mean, there's no. That's the thing though. If he does become, if they do that prophecy like Tyrion's a Targ, like in the show, there's been no foreshadowing for that really at all.
And speaking logistically, there's only 2 dragons left in the show, and
That's true.
it's clear that Jon and Dany are the obvious
Yeah,
candidates.
they're the ones that are gonna be riding them.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Unless
he's not going to be
somebody
a
becomes an
Targ on the
ice
show, is
person.
he? I think they've
No,
stepped
there's
back
no,
from
there's no way.
He can ride the evil dragon when he becomes the bad guy.
Yeah. Tyrion is the great other.
Perfect.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm kind of curious. There's no way they're gonna have, because I feel like in the books there will be some, you know, human traitors who try to, like, you know, serve the others in some way. But I feel like in this it's just gonna be a straight up fight of one side versus the other.
Yeah. I actually think the Golden Company is going to betray Cersei because they're already purchased by Illyria.
Yeah, there's no way. I think that's their explanation of how, like, now that they've built up this iron fleet for no reason, they have to figure out a way to destroy it. So they're bringing the Golden Company to do that.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, we'll get the end of it, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, but like
coming.
the conflict with the battle scenes and the conflict with the others is great, but it's
Yes.
just all that other nonsense with Cersei's plotline and the Greyjoy plotline. I can't stand it, and it's just gonna distract from other cooler things that are going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So I feel we had a little bit of GOT aftershow. All good.
You know, are you doing a wolf cast? Are we all doing different casts, or what's going on?
I have no idea. I mean, I'm still very
Who knows?
undecided on whether I want to watch it with the fandom or just leave it for a few months and then just watch it on my own.
Watch it with the fan. That's an easy answer.
I mean, I'm with you, Bina. I probably will watch while it's airing, but this is the reason why I'm not really interested in doing all the commenting on it anymore, is because I just don't have a lot of like nice stuff to say, so I just don't feel like I'm adding a lot of value. I don't want to just like shit on the show nonstop.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I would be so.
There's TV out there that I'm so excited about, like Poses on UK Netflix right now. And I was talking to QueenJames. I really want to talk about that. It's so beautiful. It's so entertaining. It's so important. And
What is it?
Pose, Pose. It's about the trans community in mid-80s New York in the ballroom scene, like voguing, like what Madonna brought to mainstream. But it's so beautifully written. It's just incredible. So it's an FX series. I would seriously check it out. Like, there's TV I'm so excited about, and yeah, I don't want to hate watch something and I kind of felt that when I was doing my binge watch with Nadia, that in a sense, because we'd watched it at speed, Game of Thrones previous seasons, we didn't get as traumatized about things that were stupid because we just moved straight forward to the next episode.
Just
Got over it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was like fine.
Fair
It
enough.
just became quite disposable, and that was probably a more enjoyable way to watch it. So I feel that that's probably the way forward, just to let it all pile up on the DVR and then just take a weekend and burn through.
Yeah, it's only 6 weeks. It's whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I feel like those at the con don't have that are going to the con in April don't have that same luxury as
Oh yeah,
that.
we have to watch it.
Yeah, because they're just going to be talking about it the whole time. But
Yeah.
When is the con?
it's April. It's the weekend of
28th.
April 20. Yeah, that weekend.
So there'll be a couple episodes in by then. So
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
will
it'll be on the
2
third
episodes
episode.
in.
Yeah. And
The third episode will end right when it ends. Yeah.
It's supposed to be a big one too. It's going to be the longest episode of the whole.
So that's a Battle of Winterfell, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be one of the battles. I don't know which one. I haven't been.
It's the 80-minute long one. Yeah.
I still have no clue how they're gonna end this. I just have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know how they can bring those.
I feel like I'm gonna be angry no matter what.
Oh yeah, so
For
much.
sure.
I mean, I think I need to care more to be angry.
Yeah, that's right.
No, because especially if they end the books in a similar way, where it's like, can you imagine an ending in the book that's completely satisfactory? Like if the others take over and it's just permanent winter, that's 8 books that we read just to learn that like humans suck and they, deserve to all die. That sucks.
In fact, I think the ending in the book will be less, if we get one, will be less satisfactory than what we see in the show. And that's part of my problem, is that they're trying in the show to have this kind of epic conclusion to it that feels very neat and tidy. And I just don't think that's how it's going to work.
Yeah, it's going to be messy and open and vague and weird when the book ends, if it ever ends. So.
And I like that more.
Yeah, exactly. I'm comfortable with that. I don't need to know what happens to Benjen or the Hound, or not every mystery needs to be solved, and that's fine.
Agreed.
And that's kind of like, as much as people lost their fucking minds about the Sopranos ending, like that, it's like, oh well, it does have a certain amount of satisfaction because
I
it just
fucking
that's
love
the ending.
that ending. And also, I don't think it's as ambiguous as people think it is. I think it's very clearly meta-directed to a certain conclusion. So that's probably why I'm not angry about it.
Yeah.
Did you see pictures of Duncan, like in the new Joyzy diner, of that final scene in the
Oh
Sopranos?
yeah, that's at the bottom.
Yeah.
Oh, he was so happy. Oh dear.
It's one of those things where
strip.
It's one of those things where I can't see like an American person wanting to do that. I guess some do, but it's like has the distance from it where it's cool to do the Sopranos tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see diners and stuff.
That wasn't at all condescending, but I'm gonna leave that in.
Right, but is it the same? Is it same thing with like American View going to visit all like the Harry Potter?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's just that I don't mean that to be condescending. I just mean that when you have a level of distance from something, I think you appreciate it more.
All right, guys, gotta take off.
Yeah, let's end it here. Otherwise, the after show risks being longer than the actual episode, which wouldn't be a first.
Yeah.
It's been a
Just
pleasure,
last
everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll try and get this out relatively quickly, so maybe QueenJames can record and put another episode out just before the show craziness begins.
She'll do it faster than everybody else.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know. I don't feel I'm at peak Bina today. So.
Yeah, so it'll take you an entire day instead of half a day.
Right. Yeah, we'll do it tomorrow.
All right, my lovelies. Have a lovely rest of the weekend. Bye.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.